It's time for us to check back in with Verna Mae and see what happens next. If you've missed any of the previous readings, just look in the description below for a playlist. It was real hot that day. My pencil was hard to hold. My hands were wet with moisture. We had already took up books after the afternoon recess. The only break in the routine was when some cows had gathered in the road near the school and the teacher had asked some of the older boys to chase them away. There were no stock laws, and cattle and hogs often became a nuisance to the school. Everyone knew the cows, who they belonged to, even what their names were. So it was easy to start them in the right direction toward home. My father said it was a good thing the hogs did run around the schoolhouse sometimes because they eat up the snakes. I knew something was wrong when one of our close neighbors rode up to the door and got off his mule and asked the teacher to come outside. Although he spoke in a low voice, I heard him say, "Kit and I wants his kids to come home. Renda got snake bit a while ago." I never waited to hear more, but started running as fast as I could. Renda was laying on her bed. Her eyes were closed. She was breathing so shallow, I thought she was dead. I ran to her bedside and grabbed her hand. Oh, Mommy, don't die. You can't die, not like my other mommy did. Please, God, don't let my mommy die." Papa came and gathered me up in his arms and said, "Hush, honey, she ain't gonna die. She will be all right." By that time, the other girls had got home. Everyone began speaking in a whisper. "Where did it bite her?" someone asked. Papa pulled the sheet up and showed us her feet. One was swollen twice its normal size and already turning blue. "Here," he said, "twice, just above the ankle." Thank God it was not a rattler, it was a copperhead, and that's bad enough. We was picking berries. Good thing I was with her. I tried to draw all the pison out, but I was so dad blame mad, I took time to kill the snake before I seed to her. It wasn't long before all the neighbors began arriving. Everyone brought something, a jar of honey, a homemade pie, some gingerbread, a kettle of chicken and dumplings, still hot from the stove. All came in and asked how she was. Papa told them, as well as could be expected. Each one had a different remedy for curing snakebite. Some said turpentine, some tobacco, some boiled oatmeal, but all agreed on one thing, moonshine whiskey. My brother asked, "Pa, did you get any whiskey for her?" Papa answered, "Yes, I used a whole quart." "What? A whole quart? If you give her that much, why that would kill her. No wonder she ain't spoke yet." "No, you fool," he retorted. "I poured some of it on her leg. I washed my mouth out with some and drunk the rest myself. How do you think I got strength enough to carry her to the house?" The neighbors never asked what needed to be done, but went about doing up the work. One man chopped some wood, someone watered and fed the mule. One of the women got the milk bucket and went to milk the cow, another gathered eggs. After supper, they all gathered together in the living room and swapped tales about snakes. One man told about how he and his brother had chopped a snake in two while hoeing corn. Thinking it was dead, they let it go. When they were pulling fodder months later, they found it still alive. It had cured up but had not grown another tail. A woman told how she had killed one that had swallowed a gourd egg, or a hen fooler, a small round gourd about the size of an egg. Women raised these and used them for nest eggs. That one had fooled a snake instead of a hen. Some women spoke of how they had marked their babies by killing a snake when they were carrying them. I remember wondering about that. Why would anyone want to kill a snake with their baby in their arms, and what had they marked the baby with, the blood? Before I had time to ask Papa about this, some of the neighbors began to gather up their children to go home. As each one left, they would say to Papa, "Kit and I, if there is anything we can do to help out, just let us know. We'll help out any way we can." 2 or 3 of the folks were going to stay all night. They would take turns setting up with Papa while he took care of my sister. When Papa saw I was determined to stay up all night too, he asked one of my brothers to take me home with them. They both had children near my own age. I did not want to leave my sister, but after being assured that they would take good care of her and would let me know if she became worse, I was talked into going. Renda got better, but it was 6 weeks before she could walk. The neighbors were true to their word. They came each day and helped with the work, bringing something with them, whatever they had to spare or what they thought we could use. They knew whenever they needed help, Papa would do the same for them. I remember the first time I came in contact with people who to me were from another world, and bitterly learned we hillbillies had a status rating somewheres between the animals and plants. I had always been, and still am, satisfied with where God placed me on this earth. I lived in a wonderful world where I was a princess, ruler of all my family, with a love shared and enjoyed by all. Of course, even at that early age, I knew there were people living outside these hills. I knew their ways were different from ours, but I did not envy them. Among our neighbors, there were no social differences. We were all equal. Some had more worldly wealth, but were always willing to share with the less fortunate ones. Did the good book not say, if you have 2 coats, give one to your neighbor? It was summertime and school was out, so I was spending a few weeks with my sister, Frances. She could take care of me, and I would help her by playing with her son, Clemens, who was a little over a year old. Her and her husband, Travis Jacobs, lived about 2 miles below what is now the Alice Lloyd College. The day I'm writing about was a real hot day. Frances had just given me and Clemens a bath and put us on some clean clothes. She sent me outside to play so she could get the baby to take a nap. I had pulled my shoes off and was sitting in a small pile of sand, pouring the sand over my toes, a pastime I always liked. I heard some horses coming long before I saw them. The squeak squeak of the saddles and the thump thump of the hooves caught my attention. I ran to the gate and peeped through the fence to see who they were. I knew they were strangers. At first I thought it was 2 men. I had never seen a woman in riding pants. I did not know it was impolite to stare at anyone, but I guess I would have anyway. I was so astonished. The 2 riders came up to the gate and the man said, "Could you please bring this lady a drink of water?" His voice was strange, and when I did not answer at once, he slowly repeated what he had said in a much louder voice, speaking as though I was deaf. I said, "Sure, get down and come in. I'll go get you some water." I had been taught to always invite anyone into your house. He said, "No, you bring the water out here." It was not a request, but a demand. I did not understand. There was something about his voice that made me feel very uncomfortable, as if I had done something wrong and needed to be ashamed. I looked at the lady. She was smiling, not a friendly smile, but more of a smirk, and she said softly, "Please?" I went into the house and told Frances what I wanted. She filled a glass water pitcher with good cool water and giving me one of her nice glasses, warned me to be careful and not fall. And while she said, "Be nice," I hurried back. The horses were stomping and prancing, wanting to get started on their journey. I was scared of them, but I still went up close to the lady's horse and reached the pitcher and glass up to her. I remember the perfume smell, more repellent to me than the odor of leather and horse. Again the man ordered, "Fill the glass with the water and give it to the lady." After giving her the water, I turned to him and asked, "Do you want some too?" And he angrily answered, "I do not." And then turning to the woman, he began talking about me as if I was not present. You never know about these people. The water may not be clean. Their toilets may be near their wells. Some even use water from the creeks. I knew this was not so, but I had been taught to not tell a grown-up that they were lying. "I guess you won't pay for bringing the water," he said, turning to me. "Oh, no," I answered, shocked that he even suggested such a thing. "My pa would skin me alive if I was to charge anybody for water. He says water is a free gift from God, and I am pleased to give it to you as well." "Well," he said, and reaching into his pockets, he took out a nickel and tossed it toward me. "You can say I am paying you for bringing the water to us. Here, you can buy you some candy when you go to town." I burst out in a very loud laugh. "What do you find so funny?" the man asked. "Why, to think that anyone would go all the way to town just to spend one little bitty nickel." I laughed. I did not pick the coin up, but left it there on the ground. The man's face turned very red, and I could see the woman was trying to keep from laughing. He turned to her and said, "Look, there in the backyard, how disgusting." I did not know what the word meant, but there was no mistaking his tone of voice. "Oh, you mean our little chicken coop?" "No," he said, "it's what you have on the chicken coop. Do you know what that is?" "Sure," I said. "That's a piece of an old wore-out flag." "You mean you knew it was an American flag and still you used it to cover your chickens?" "Sure, we have a flag at school. We have a tall flagpole and we give the flag salute every morning. We also have one for the post office. My father is the postmaster," I added proudly. "Do you know what you're supposed to do with a flag when it becomes worn out and must be replaced? You must burn it." "But mister," I cried, "that would cause an awful smell and would do no one any good." "Folks who care anything about their country would not use a flag as you have." Then he turned to his friend and finished, "That's what you can expect from these backward people." I did not know that my sister had come out on the porch until I heard her voice cut through the air. "I guess I love my country as much as anyone, but I don't think any government's going to care if I raise chickens or not. That old flag has kept many a gang of doodles from getting wet when it rains, warm when it's cold, and a shade when it's hot. And God willing, I will raise several more. It's none of your business what I do, and I would take it kindly, sir, if you would go on and attend to your own self." My sister Frances sure had a way of cutting the dirt out from under your feet when she was mad. You would never know by looking at her that there was anything wrong. Little did she know that day that the little baby she was holding in her arms would serve over 35 years of his life defending the American flag, and that his son would one day pay the supreme price while in the armed services. This same summer that I stayed with my sister Frances, I was to make friends with someone who was to be an influence over my whole life. Verna Slone was a close neighbor. She lived in a large 2-story white house with her 2 brothers and 2 sisters, all grown up. Their father had died and their mother remarried. Her mother had moved to her new husband's farm. Verna and her brothers and sisters had remained on their father's farm. Many times Frances would take Clemens and me and leave us with Verna when she needed a babysitter for us. I would take care of Clemens, but I wasn't old enough to be trusted all alone. I have not got words enough to describe Verna. She was one of the most kind, unselfish persons I ever knew. She spent her whole life working hard and helping other people, never thinking of herself. I know there are many people who can remember many nice things she did for them, not just her relatives, but anyone who needed help. She was always ready. She was a very small woman in size, but her heart was big as all outdoors. One night her brothers and sisters were going to be away from home, and she asked Frances if I could spend the night with her, as she would be lonesome all alone. I loved her and felt proud she wanted me. After supper she popped us some corn, and then she brought out her quilt pieces and began working on them. I showed so much interest in what she was doing that she got me a needle and thread, cut me a pattern, and started me on a hobby that has continued for a lifetime. That was the first of several hundred quilts I have made. Dellie Slone never married, but she was a second mother to many kids. Just a few weeks before she died, I went to visit her, and she gave me some house flowers, which I still have. One evening, Dellie laid down on her bed to rest, and that kind heart gave up and quit beating. She went on to live with Jesus, where the record of her many good deeds has gone on before. Many people ask me if I remember the first quilt I ever made, and I say, sure, I can remember starting it, but I don't know if I ever finished it. An 8-point star pieced on paper. When kids ask me to show them how to make quilts, I sometimes hesitate, given the excuse that I don't have time and don't want to be bothered. Then I remember Dellie and the patience she had teaching me. I get ashamed of myself and I try to be like her. Memorial Day does not just mean May 30th to the people of Caney and surrounding hollers and branches. In the past, our ancestors started a tradition that we faithfully and cheerfully carry on. It probably started in the early days when we had no preachers except the circuit rider who only visited us once a year. So our dead were buried with no funerals until this once-a-year visit. Then everyone met on the graveyard and a funeral for all our loved ones that had passed over the past year was performed. Each family that bears the same name or claims to a common ancestor has a family graveyard. Ours, the Summer Slone, is at the mouth of Trace Fork on Caney. Here are over 90 graves. All except 3 are directly my relatives, and those 3 are indirectly attached to us. The triplets have a family graveyard in the head of Hollybush. The Jacobs are on Ball Point, the Watts on Watts Fork, the Shorts on Short Fork, and etc. The Jimmy graveyard is a combination of 3 different plots where a different set of Slones have their final resting place. So we have a memorial service for each graveyard every year at different dates. Ours, the Summer Slones, is the first Sunday after the first Saturday in June. This date was chosen because it is close to Grandma Frankie's birthday, which was also the day Jesus called her home. In my childhood, this day was looked forward to much more than Christmas, and still is a very important day. It is also a family reunion, as all the relatives from far and near come to visit. We also have a dinner where everyone is invited, plenty to eat, and lots of fun. Of course, we now have more conveniences than our grandparents had, such as refrigeration, gas stoves, and paper plates, but we do not have any more to eat nor more enjoyment. We try to stick to the old traditions as much as we can. In the old days, we would start planning for Memorial, pronounced Morial Day by us, early in the spring when we planted our beans and potatoes. We tried to rush our vegetables so they would be ready to eat by the 1st of June. I remember also we had a June apple that was ready for green apple pies. You never eat anything in this world as good as those pies. All the neighbor men would decide on a given day during the week before and meet at the graveyard to clean off the graves. With axes, hoes, and shovels, they would cut weeds, briars, sprouts around the fence, mend the grave houses, putting on new shingles, straightening up the tombstones, and build a stand. The stand was a platform with a roof but open sides. Here the preachers and older people would sit. Logs were laid crosswise to form seats for everyone else around the stand. I love to attend these outside services. You feel so much closer to God. I've been in some fine, costly churches, but nothing compares with these crude, simple wooden places of worship. Did Jesus not preach in the open? Each family rivaled in trying to have the most to eat, trying to have as much work done as they could before the visitors began arriving. They had to come either by horseback or jolt wagon. Those that lived far away came Friday or Saturday and stayed all night. The men folks in our family would have large baskets of corn already shucked to feed the mules. They would pick out their largest ears of corn as a matter of pride. My cousin, Mary Owens Sparkman, says she can remember her mother filling a large barrel with gingerbread, placing it in the smokehouse where the spilled salt from the cured meat would keep it damp and moist. She throwed a quilt over the barrel. This way the gingerbread would have kept fresh for weeks. Except the crowd ate it up long before then. Did you ever eat a stack cake made from alternate layers of gingerbread and homemade apple butter? One of the few dishes we still try to have at our memorial dinners, that and our shucky beans. This was also one time of the year when everyone had new clothes. Most all the women folks made their dresses and bonnets. The young girls wanted new hats. I remember how important these new hats were with their shiny bangles and bright colored ribbons and feathers. The owners would slip them into an empty pillowcase and hang them from a nail on the wall when not in use. It was the buying of my first new hat that caused me to meet my future husband for the second time. Again, I ask you, was it fate or chance? Father had gone to Uncle Melton Owens and bought a new hat for each of the older girls, Renda, Veda, and Frances, but he could not find mine and Edna's size. When he saw how disappointed we were, he told us we could go over to Uncle Caney's store and see if he had some. Uncle Caney lived at Hindman, so that meant we would get to stay all night. When I heard this, I did not care if I got a hat or not. I wanted that trip more than anything in the world. So early Wednesday morning, we started walking toward Hindman, an 8-mile walk. Too much for a 6 or 7-year-old child? Not then. Everyone walked and thought nothing of it. If we got hungry, we would stop at someone's house about dinner time and be assured of a welcome invitation to share the family meal. I don't remember too much about the trip or spending the night. Uncle Caney and Aunt Susie lived in a large white house with an upstairs close beside the store building. I do remember one thing. His grandson, Jay Patton, was staying with him. It was the first time I had ever seen anyone in a wheelchair. At first, I was kind of awed at him, but we soon became friends, and he made me know that he did not want me to feel sorry for him. He even let me push his chair for him. Edna helped with the chores and dishes, but me, I stayed with Uncle Caney in the store and ate enough candy to stuff a mule. When it came time to buy the hats, I found just the one I wanted. I remember that hat as if it was yesterday. A beautiful yellow wide brim, a circle of roses and cherries, so real you wanted to eat them, a large ribbon hanging down in the back that bounced when I walked. My sister Edna's hat was just as pretty, I guess, but I do not remember hers, but I do remember the price. Hers was 75 cents and mine was 50. I did not like this and began to grumble about it. When Uncle Caney learned that I was mad and wanted a hat that cost as much or more than Edna's, he said he would fix that. He would let her have hers for 50 and I could pay the 75 for mine. That satisfied me, but I could not understand why Father laughed so when I told him. For some reason, we decided we would come back up Alum Cave. Alum Cave is so named because of a large deposit of alum under a cave close to the holler. In old times, our folks gathered and used this alum for medicine and mixed it with their roots and barks to obtain the colors they wanted to dye their yarn. There is a large flat rock close to the side of the road. Sam Johnson lived in a house at one side of the road, my future father-in-law on the other. As Edna and I came up this path, Willie and his cousin was sitting on this large rock fishing for minnows in the holler. They had a bent pin hook and a sapling pole with a twined line. We saw them before they saw us. I knew who Willie was at once, although it had been over a year since I had last met him. I wanted to be real friendly, but I sure went at it wrong. "How far is it? About 1.5 miles up this road?" I smart-alecked. His cousin pulled his hat down over his eyes and never spoke. Willie waited until he got his fish off the hook and then looked up with a smile ready to answer me. As the smile slowly changed to a frown, you could tell that it was only then he really paid any attention to the true meaning of my words. "2 measures of a damn fool," he said. Lay down and measure yourself and see." His cousin snickered and my sister laughed out loud. Ever since that day, he has never learned to take a joke from me, and I have never had sense enough to quit trying. As we came up the road, even Edna began to feel sorry for me. "Is he still your feller?" she asked, and I slowly answered, "Yeah, I guess so. Anyway, it was my fault." In the hurry and rush of getting ready for Memorial, I forgot what Willie had said. No, to tell the truth, I did not forget. I just pushed it to the back of my mind, and the hurt went away, and I could laugh. We did more house cleaning and cooking, preparing for that one day, than we do now in a whole year. We cleaned and cleaned the already clean house. Of course, I did not do very much except get in the way. They pushed me out of their way so much that Father made a refrain. "Verna Mae, you're in the way, go and play." Edna and I went to the creek banks and hunted nice white sand rocks. Then taking a hammer, we crushed the rocks into sand. This was sprinkled all over the puncheon floors, and with a large homemade scrub broom, they made that floor shine like new money. I could not understand why we could not just scoop up the sand from the creek, but Renda said it was not clean, and anyway, that's how we always done it. We took all the chairs, bark-bottom chairs my father had made, to the creek bank, and with large rags and the beat-up sand, we scrubbed and rinsed them over and over. All the quilts and bedclothes were either washed or hung in the sun to make them all smell nice. And oh boy, it is some job to wash quilts, and how hard it was to wring that water out. We most always took them to the creek to wrench them. Father usually helped with this job. Mary Sparkman's mother, my aunt, took yards and yards of muslin cloth that she sewed together and tacked each side to the floor of the loft. She then filled this with corn shucks, making a bed about 13 or 14 feet long and about 6 feet wide. The men and boys would sleep there side by side. The large fireplace was cleaned of all the cinders, then whitewashed with clay gathered from a clay bank found along the creek. The door and window facings were also treated this way, and woe unto anyone that forgot and leaned against them, for the clay would come off on their clothes. Large bunches of wild flowers and leaves were put in jars or buckets of water and placed in the grate and on the hearth. The walls and ceiling of each room were lined with clean newspapers or pages from magazines pasted up one at a time with paste made from cooked flour. The yard, which was free of any grass and beaten hard from use, was swept clean. All the many, many flowers surrounding and along the yard fence were weeded and trimmed. All the silverware, which with us did not have any silver about it, was scoured with wood ashes saved from the cook stove. This was one job I could do all by myself, and I enjoyed doing it. The stove and even the stovepipes were treated to a blacking of soot mixed with butter or lard. Sure, we made do with what we had, but I think we deserve praise, not ridicule. Maybe I should tell here how we washed our clothes. The day before, wood was gathered for a fire to heat the water. The water was either carried from the creek or drawn from the well or spring. A wash tub or mink kettle was placed on 2 rocks with a space between them where the fire was builded. The wash place was sometimes near the creek or in the yard. In winter, we heated our water on the stove and placed our tubs on chairs in the kitchen. The clothes were rubbed on a washboard after being smeared with homemade lye soap. We washed them through 2 waters, that is, washing each piece separately in one tub of water, putting it in another tub, and going through the same process again. The white clothes were then put in a tub of water in which a small amount of lye and lots more soap was added, placed on the fire, and allowed to boil. They were taken from this water, rinsed through 2 more tubs of water, bluing being added to the last. Then some were starched. The starch was made by cooking flour mixed with water and straining it through a cloth. The colored clothes were not boiled, just rinsed twice. Then all the clothes were hung one at a time with clothespins on the clothesline to dry. You think this was a lot of work? Remember, they must still be ironed. The irons, big, heavy, clumsy things, were heated on the stove or fireplace. The handle also got hot, so you must have a rag to hold them with and one to clean them before smoothing them over your clothes. And we did not have ironing boards, but a folded quilt on the table or floor. I somehow feel guilty with my automatic washer and dryer and drip dry clothes. I bought my first wringer washer and electric iron in 1950 when my fourth child was 6 years old. But I am proud to say my children went to school with very clean clothes. Of course, they did not come back clean. But with all this cleaning, cooking, and making new clothes, the corn must still be hoed, the vegetables taken care of, and the chores of feeding, milking, etc. Our folks did not feel overburdened. Work came as natural to them as breathing. They knew no other life and wanted no other. They were happy and content. I wish with all my heart I could go back to those days, the contentment, the enjoyment of a simple life, the togetherness of family, when the day was not measured by the hours and a neighbor's worth was not judged by his bank account, and no one envied the other. We had bad times and troubles, like the constant battle against flies and bed bugs, but the good outweighed the bad. Very positive note there to end this part of the reading on. Verna Mae, you can tell, really looks back fondly at the time when she was growing up. Of course, I'm happy. There's people happy today. But I do think maybe what she was trying to describe, that contentment with not being, we all feel like today that we're kind of living the rat race and we never have time to just sit and enjoy each other and all those kind of things. I think maybe that's what she was hinting at. It is true, everyone says you look back with rose-colored glasses, you only see the good times, so I guess maybe there's a part of that. But really, I like that part, how she's looks back and can see that people worked really hard, but they were content and they were happy. Very exciting start to this part with Renda getting snake bit. That was very scary. I can't imagine. The snakes that we have to worry about here where I live are the same. The rattlesnake and the copperhead, those are the ones that we have to worry about when we're out in the garden or picking blackberries, all those kind of things. Those are the two. Now, this is an interesting part when she talked about, and she was too little to understand what they meant by marking the baby. That's something that I don't hear anyone hardly talk about today, but even when I was pregnant with Corey and Katie, I would still, one of my uncles told me that he was concerned if I looked at my grandmother who had passed away that I might mark my babies. So you'll hear lots of stories like that. Maybe someone did get not bit by a snake but scared by a snake when they were pregnant, and then the baby will have a birthmark that kind of looks like a snake, those kind of things. So that's some interesting folklore that you can find in Appalachia and probably in other places. And that part when they're talking about Renda being sick from the snake bite, really heartwarming how the neighbors just pitched in. They just come. They knew the cow needed to be milked. They knew supper needed to be cooked. They knew whatever needed to be done in the barn. The animals fed, all those kind of things. I would say that neighborliness is still alive in my area of Appalachia, but it's different than it was in those days. People are more strangers now. I've often heard a lot of people kind of talk about, and it's true, when I was a kid, you didn't think about calling ahead to tell somebody you was coming. You just went and visited. You just popped in. And today we wouldn't do that. We'd always want to call and make sure we wasn't interrupted, make sure that, we weren't bothering anybody. So there's kind of, I don't know, it's not that you're strangers exactly, but there's kind of a reserve that's put there where she just said they just come. They didn't even ask. They brought this, they brought that. They were going to spend the night. They just did. They just come in and kind of took over. But that part's really heartwarming when you think about a community coming together like that to help the family. Also interesting, again, in this part, every part we've read so far, kind of you can see that Verna Mae and kind of see why, that she was really sensitive to those stereotypes of people, what they think about Appalachians. And certainly the man on the horse, you could tell, I'd like to go back and ask him, well, if you're so worried about their water, why are you asking for a drink, But you can tell that that's just one more reason why she kind of has that outlook and why she keeps mentioning those kind of things. Very nice, though her sister kind of put him in his place, and then Verna Mae kind of did too, even though she was just a little girl. It's funny though, it's what we don't, you can't know what someone's thinking, but there he was thinking about her, and she was shocked. She was just basically thinking, well, you're terrible. Why are you acting like this? And nobody never taught you the way they've taught me. So it's funny. Of course, we can't see into each other's minds, but that's why we should never make those assumptions, which we're all guilty of. But that's why those stereotypes, any stereotypes, are so wrong, because they're trying to lump all the people together and think they're one way just because Verna Mae and her family lived like they did. He just assumed that meant that they were nasty and not very smart. The parts about the Memorial Day, she said, instead of Memorial Day, those were really interesting. Just imagine what a great time that they had. People here don't so much have Memorial Days. I hear about more Decoration Days. So Decoration Day, a church will have it at the same time every year. Of course, these are not family graveyards like she was talking about, and they will clean all the graves off, and then on Decoration Day people will come home to that church, maybe that it's not been there since last year or maybe longer than that, and they'll bring flowers to decorate their loved ones' graves, and there's usually food and there's usually singing along with maybe some preaching. I really love the knowledge of that part of using rocks to clean the floor. How inventive, and how did they learn that? I've also read about ladies in those days using snow, if it was clean snow, and they would put it down and then sweep it and it would get the dirt up. But fascinating how they used the rocks. And I wrote down, and the wood ashes. I knew it was something else. The wood ashes that they used on the silverware, which Verna Mae says was not silver, so I'm guessing it was probably wooden. But amazing how they went to all that trouble, and the clay that they used on the walls, and you could just imagine how prideful they felt, and how good when their house was just sparkling clean, and they knew all those people was going to come stay with them, and washing all the blankets and the quilts and wrenching them, as we would say, wrench them out in the creek. Just so heartwarming to think about them all pitching in together to make everything nice. I have one memory of, I have lots of memories of Decoration Days and things like that. Homecoming and Decoration Day kind of at churches. But I have one memory of going to a graveyard to clean off graves with my Mama Marie. And I really don't remember what graveyard it was. It could have been the one at Bethel, here in Warren. If you're a local person, Bethel Baptist Church, I'm not sure they have church there any longer. It could have been that one, but it could have been a different one. It could have been Pine Log Baptist Church. Anyway, but I remember being there with her and playing around, and one of the old kind of gravestones, it was just a little small one, but it fell on and hit the corner, it hit my knee. I still have a little scar there. And it didn't injure me terribly or anything like that, but I was kind of like Verna Mae. I was really acting like it was, and so like for the rest of the day and 2 or 3 days after that, I refused to walk on it. So I went around hopping. Everywhere I'd go was hop, hop, hop. And I'm sure it probably turned blue, but the little scar I have is just a little nick. It just right on like on your kneecap. So there's not much there, so I'm sure that's why it made the little cut. But I really was really carried on about that knee, and didn't want to walk on it. So, and I wonder, if I look back, I wonder if that's what we were doing, if Mama was just doing the graves because it needed to be done, or if she was doing it in preparation for Decoration Day or something like that. I really enjoyed this part of the book. I hope you did too. I really like Verna Mae's outlook, how she takes a pride in her culture, and she knows they're not perfect. She knows there's things wrong and all that, but how she looks back at the goodness and the love of of her family, and and humor all the way through it. Even humorous about the snake, that her daddy said, no, I poured it on her. I washed my mouth out and I drank the rest of it. Even that's humorous for sure. So please leave a comment and let me know what you liked about this part of the reading, and please stop back by next Friday, so we've got to see what happens next to Verna Mae.